All right, so we are live. Hey y'all. Welcome to goodness, I'm sorry. I'm over here forgetting what I'm doing. Welcome to What We Carry, Black Mothers, Mental Health and Generational Healing. If you are here, then you are here to learn a little something from this panel, to get something delightful from these amazing women that we have today, and hopefully leave a little fuller, have some questions answered, and be able to sort of go from there. So before we get started, we got to do a little bit of hey y'all, and a little bit of a some greeting. So Brittany, if you are ready to come on and greet and do the opening for us.
Hey everyone, I am Brittany. I'm the founder of the Black Girl Health Collective, and I am so happy to be in space with these amazing women who are subject matter experts and just powerhouses in their spaces. And so we are going to have a whole conversation about what we carry. And we're going to be weaving in themes and talking a little bit about Zora Neale Hurston, both her life and her experiences as an author, and some of her works, and weaving it in and talking about how some of those themes are reflected in our day-to-day experiences. So buckle up, because I know it's going to be not only a very, very great kiki, but also I know that you all are going to be feeling very poured into after this conversation wraps. And coming at such a great time after the day after Juneteenth. So I am incredibly grateful to these women for joining in this space and being willing to create this space and have these conversations. So
Thank you.
without further ado, I'm going to pass it off to Dr. Donna, and we'll get into it. Thank you all so much.
Thank you for giving us that little bit of an overview. And I'm going to give you a little taste of the flow. So we're going to do a little bit of tone setting. We're going to talk, we're going to have a facilitated discussion, and then we'll have some time for a Q&A. So you can and will have your questions answered. You just got to remember to put them in the chat. All right, so I actually want to just start with can we get an introduction? Because everybody is not stalking y'all the way that I'm stalking y'all. So if you could each just introduce yourselves and let the people know who you are, what you do.
You go first.
Okay. Hey, everybody. I am Dr. Lori Johnson. I am a licensed reproductive mental health therapist out of Los Angeles, California. And I specialize in mainly like infertility trauma, pregnancy loss. And so I work mainly within the reproductive space. So I'm really honored to be here and to, just be in such amazing company, and really, thanking the Black Girl Health Collective and the Zora Neale Hurston Trust for putting this together, because, I love pouring into Black women, and, so much of why I do what I do was shaped from, my own experiences as a Black woman. And so it's nice to be here and to contribute to the conversation.
Thank you so much for introducing yourself.
My name is Dr. Ayanna Abrams. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist. I'm based in Atlanta, Georgia. And a lot of my work specializes in perinatal mental health. So this is family planning, this is pregnancy, this is postpartum care. And most of my work is also with Black women and families and Black couples. And I pull in a lot of my research and, clinical expertise in racism-based trauma to help families, right? And people who across the birthing spectrum really navigate all of the dynamics and kind of all the complexities that come with this stage of life, whether planned or unplanned. And this is a really, really important conversation, just given where we are in history, where we are politically, where we are socially. So this conversation is always relevant. I'm glad to be here.
See, y'all don't even know who y'all got right now. Powerhouses. Okay. Oh yeah, I should introduce myself. Hey y'all.
You.
Because I was about to skip right on past it. My name is Dr. Donna Oriowo. I am a sex and relationship therapist in the Washington, D.C. metro area. I like to say I'm helping Black women get free, fabulous, and effed. And I feel like if we're talking pleasure, if we're talking mental health, if we're talking trauma, I'm your girl. I'm there. I'm having that conversation. And yet everybody and their mama out here having these kids. So I felt that it was also very important for us to have this conversation. I'm very excited to facilitate this conversation. It means I get to sit back and learn and get my questions answered. So I am super excited to have this discussion with y'all. So for anyone who is just joining us from whatever streaming platform you're on, hey, we are having a delicious conversation about what we carry, Black mothers, mental health, and generational healing. And just to give a little bit more of an overview, we are now about to get into a tone setting. So this is where we're going to take a moment before we get into the facilitated discussion, and then we'll have some Q&A at the end. We'll have a closing, and then we'll be out of here on time, maybe. On time-ish. Let's go with on time-ish. I don't want no pressure. No pressure. No pressure. All right. So I wanted us to just take a grounding moment and to consider, number one, not just what we're here for, but why we are here individually. So if you just take a moment to just sort of ground into whatever space you're in, feel free to close your eyes or soften your eyes and just take a deep breath with me. In, 1, 2, 3, out, 1, 2, 3. Let's take another breath. In, 1, 2, 3. Out, 1, 2, 3. And we'll do one final breath. In, 1, 2, 3. Out, 1, 2, 3. One thing that I know is that it's the middle of the day. No matter where you are, you was doing something before you got here, which means that those things can often be very heavy on your mind. And taking a moment to pause, to breathe, to reset can help bring you back to your present moment and help ground you in the time and space that you're actually in and not the one that you're planning for. I know that y'all be busy. Y'all be outside. Y'all be doing all the things. We are thinking about what we're going to do with our day off tomorrow already. Some of y'all are doing a really great job of dreading work already. You're already dreading Monday work. I just want you to be here right now. This space is specifically meant to honor Black maternal experiences. We're going to affirm those experiences in this space. I just want to make sure that we took the time to really consider that before we move in to the fullness of this conversation. Is there anything that either of you doctors would like to add?
Just appreciating the groundedness. I think for us as healers too, coming into this, we've had some pretty heavy weeks in what we're holding for our communities, for our clients as well. So I appreciated that reset too, and really setting the tone for today.
Thank you. I've been known to set a tone every now and then. So let's get into this conversation. So Zora Neale Hurston was one of the first Black female writers in America to explore the complexities of Black motherhood. She held a historically unique position to do so, belonging to the first generation after the Civil War, in which Black mothers could emotionally invest in their children without the constant threat of separation through slavery. Her raw depictions on womanhood in all of its facets influenced later writers such as Alice Walker and Toni Morrison, establishing her as a pioneer in fostering an internal community-centered dialogue about the distinct tribulations Black mothers face. Growing up in the all-Black town of Eatonville, Florida, Hurston also offered on the early literary depictions of how communal support can provide Black mothers with strength and solace in difficult times. So keeping all of this in mind, right? Like keeping it up top. Could you please talk about the emotional weight of Black motherhood in America? We're going to go ahead and start with you, Dr. Johnson.
The weight of Black motherhood, it's such a layered and complex, I think, experience with so many historical roots. And when I think about or hear about, Hurston's legacy, and I think about, the legacies within our own families and what's been passed down generationally, the history that we have learned or haven't learned, but that still lives within our bodies, and how that has shaped how we create our families, the values that we have as families, and how we try to impart those families too. So it's like this intersection of this intergenerational kind of transmission of strength, of complexity, of love and resilience, and also pain and trauma, just all kind of married together. It feels like that's kind of what kind of gets encompassed, kind of combined into, or like just making up this experience of Black motherhood. And it's still evolving. I think as we're kind of honoring where we are today, as Dr. Ayana, mentioned, kind of socially and politically, in her intro, we are still at the forefront of trying to figure out how to, honor the burdens that we have carried, but also still trying to figure out where we're going to go and plan and to protect and to lift up, so that we can, we can still, like you said, pour into ourselves and pour into each other.
Thank you for bringing that into the space. I think the thing that really hit me was the still carrying burdens while still trying to move forward. So that it's almost like maybe the very acute experience that Zora Neale Hurston and those who were the first generation after the Civil War, that maybe what they experienced was pretty in its own way, very singular, but it's almost like the legacy of that has continued forward. At least that's what I took from what you put down.
That's exactly what I was trying to express.
Dr. Ayana, you got anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to add to that, but I was thinking about, right, just in terms of also that generation and Hurston's work, is the importance of the stories of Black women, right? That when I also think about like kind of what we carry our stories through our voice. We carry our stories in our bodies. We carry our stories in song, in dance, right? We carry our stories through hair. Like we carry our stories in all these different ways. And it makes me think about, the stories that we are still able to kind of listen to and kind of bring forth and utilize, right, to protect ourselves, to remain connected with each other. But I also think about all the stories that have been lost, and all the stories that have been suppressed, and all the voices and ways in which Black women and how we have experienced motherhood have been silenced, have been antagonized, right? And all these different things. And again, the weight of all of that and the strength, right, that we've needed to remain connected, right? But we also know that we're also very disconnected, right? There's a lot of shame that this carries, right? There's a lot of shame that the different experiences carry. There's a lot of isolation as well in Black motherhood. And I think we're all kind of part of this work to be able to help kind of close the gap around that, right? But that's also what we are carrying in all these different ways. And what does it mean to bring that more to the light so that we can continue to change those stories and kind of get back to the stories that we originally created, right? Not the stories that we have now, that so many things have been stripped from us over the past few years.
Oh, that's, yeah. The thing that just came up for me was it got me thinking about the African diaspora, right? The Black diaspora. So moving from Africa to America and all the stops along the way. So because you talked about like this connecting the stories, and it made me wonder, do you think that there is a differing weight of Black motherhood within the Black diaspora? And I'm thinking specifically and personally, I'm thinking of Sudan at this moment, right? And what it must be like emotionally to try and raise a child or to have a child in a war-torn area, and even to have your body not even remain as yours, right? Like you have no sovereignty over it because someone can decide that they are going to take from you what you did not offer. And then you have to raise the product of that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to be careful because social media doesn't allow you to say certain things.
Mm-hmm.
You're picking up what I'm putting down.
Yeah.
Yes. Whew.
So do you think that there is a differing in the weight within that? I'm gonna start with you, Dr. Ayana.
Yeah. I was just thinking, I was like, okay, we here now. We said we was going to talk about it. We
I
said we
know.
was today. I saw Dr. Lori
You
be like,
cracked the door, I kicked it open.
we are here now.
We are
And I
here.
do think that there is a different weight, right, based on where we are, again, regionally, like where we are regionally and politically, right, where we are placed in history. And I think that that is also part of the collective experience, right? I think that there are vast differences, and I think there are ways in which there are, some experiences in Black motherhood that have different versions of privilege, right? Where there's also a lot of disadvantage, right? And we're always kind of nuancing, right, the privilege and the lack thereof. But depending on what your immediate circumstances are, right, you're of course carrying a different burden, right? If you are in somewhere that is war torn, if you are in an abusive relationship, if you've experienced loss before, like all these different things, right, that can really complicate what's an already complex experience. And then thinking about this across generation and across region, that those are also the same experiences that bond us, right, and kind of have this kind of collective story right across the generations. There are different weights and different burdens, and then there are burdens that in some ways I think our bodies are all holding, right, because these are burdens that have been there for
Exactly.
Thank you for bringing that into the space. Dr. Johnson, did you want to add anything?
No, I was, really nodding along and really thinking about the same things. It's interesting thinking about where we come from, in the diaspora, and how that can also inform our experiences, because, whether some of us are first generation or not, can also, I think, make a difference. I'm so aware that, in some communities outside the US where, not necessarily Sudan or Congo, but, other places where, they're definitely much more kind of Afrocentric and centered around, us. And then when we come here, we notice that there are definitely disparities that we start to see. So there's some protective factors that I think exist in other communities in the diaspora that we don't have as well. So again, it's part of that nuance that Dr. Ayana mentioned. And, just those layers that we carry depending on, where we come from.
Y'all are reminding me of one Dr. Candace Hargons. She's the author of the book Good Sex, which is a really great book. I mean, it should be called Great Sex because it's a great book.
I was just with her the other day. She is great.
Amazing. And she recently did a really amazing keynote at the American Association of Sex Educators, Counselors, and Therapists conference in Vegas some weeks back. And what she'd mentioned is that there are conversations that we all need to have with ourselves, mainly about luxury, livelihood, and life. That we are all in various areas, and that sometimes what we're trying to negotiate is what of our livelihood and what of our luxuries we are willing to sort of give up or negotiate with in order to be properly in community with others. Particularly, like I'm thinking like Target boycotts and the like, right? Like sometimes that's just giving up a luxury, whereas for other people, being outside, risking whatever with ICE and all that, it may be giving up full livelihood and even life with the way that some things are going. And so when I think about Zora Neale Hurston and, what it may have been like right after the Civil War, I'm like, number one, did they trust it, right? Immediately? Did they trust that they'd be able to keep their offspring? And it made me wonder, and I feel like you've already answered this question. Actually, the both of you have already answered this question, but it made me still wonder, is the emotional weight shifted or lifted when we're talking about the here and now? Because while we may not be worried about separation through slavery in the traditional sense, right? Because I mean, I still think that the prison industrial complex ain't nothing but fancy renamed slavery. I'm wondering about all of the uncertainty And I'm thinking specifically of millennials. I don't know. I feel like millennials, we were just born at the wrong time, right? Like, it's like, where's the goodness? Like going through the however many recessions we've gone through, our first global pandemic, right? And I say first because I fully believe that there will be more, right? War, and currently, the current state of our government and what is looking like they are trying to brew right now that could end up being World War III. So I'm wondering then, how is the emotion? Is it lifted or shifted with regard to Black motherhood now, given these givens? Whoever wants to go first.
I immediately think it's shifted.
Yep.
I don't think it's lifted. I think that this is, this really taps into a lot of fears, historical fears that we have fought so much in this country, fought for, our freedom, and fought for our communities and fought for, our families in so many different ways. And we've been at the forefront, in the civil rights movement and so many different movements. I just see that burden. And even though I think, I know that a lot of us are talking about being in a period of rest or trying to be in a period of rest, and also feels like there's this innate still, kind of quality about, about us where, we're called into duty in some ways, and so I don't see it as lifted per se, but I do see a little recalibration as we think about moving forward and how we, take care of ourselves and, and ultimately try to take care of our families.
So recalibration, not lifted.
Recalibration, yeah. See it as recalibrating or re-strategizing, maybe.
I appreciate that. I'm leaning much more towards shifted than lifted. But what I immediately was thinking about was how there's a way in which, how do I word this? There's a way in which there has been such an oppressive gaslighting that wants to convince us that things have been lifted. And the reason that we know that it's not actually lifted, but it is shifted, is that we're still doing all this work to rest. We're still doing all of this active work to try to find a soft life and create joy and find peace and find all these things. And what that says to me is that it's not lifted. That says to me that things have been moved around, but we are still needing to work really, really, really hard to access safety, to access basic human rights, to access community, to access, adequate care and health care, to access all these things. That's what actually says to me that, no, it's not really lifted. It's just shifted in a different direction. While we do have access to many more things than we did in previous generations, that work is still there. That work is still really, really there, or else I think we would be out of work, right? If it wasn't there. There's a reason we are all in this type of particularly liberatory work, because we are liberated, right? So when I'm thinking about that question of like lifted or shifted, I was like, yeah, it can. There are ways, or maybe there are nuanced ways in which some parts of this feel lifted, but not enough for us to feel that collectively. Not enough for us to rest, not enough for us to collectively be and feel well. Just there's still a lot of work to do, because things are, I want to say only, I don't want to minimize it, but things are only shifting. They are not actually lifted. There hasn't been a deeper transformation yet. We're still in the trenches of a lot of this.
Yeah. We're still in the trenches of, navigating oppressive structures, and, they have just been relabeled, renamed, but they still exist. Yeah.
They just keep hitting us with the remix.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah,
Okay.
we have to be in conversation about this and still take all of these things. Obviously, we are talking about a very specific experience right now, but to take all of this seriously, because we're not all lifted and shifted until we all are, right? Again, none of us are free until all of us are free.
Amen to that. So then, thinking about like mental health and healing through generations,
Mm-hmm.
I'm wondering what has healing looked like from one generation to the next, given that we're saying that things have mostly just shifted, not lifted.
Mm-hmm.
So like given each generation has had its challenges to consider, what has healing even looked like from one generation to the next?
Mm-hmm.
I think there's many ways that healing has been or can be accessed, right, between laterally, right, within the generations, but also intergeneration. One, in terms of this like storytelling, right, continuing to tell the stories, continuing to remain curious and asking older generations about their lived experiences, right, previous and former, right, being able to ask being able to kind of ask those questions and kind of have new language, right, for things. Again, challenging, right, because generations, one, don't have language, have been so traumatized that they've suppressed, right, so many things. But I think that is healing does come through that kind of connection and remaining curious and kind of using the information that we do get to be able to kind of protect and kind of preserve in different ways. I think that healing does come from these, these conversations and practices around resting more and accessing joy, and more recent kind of movements around raising like free children, right, letting them play, all those kinds of things. I think we're still stuck in some places, but when I think about healing as it relates to Black motherhood, I immediately just think about staying connected and keeping our stories alive, keeping the conversations going, writing things so that they are etched in history, things that can't be taken away from us, but knowing that we have to collectively stay together in this versus othering each other across these different experiences, for me, is one of the foundational acts of healing.
No, I definitely appreciate that, just how we access healing, kind of laterally or intergenerationally, and, and the power of storytelling and conversation and language, because I think that also continues to connect us to what some of the practices that, that have been helpful to, to us collectively, or, just, that have gotten forgotten, or erased. And kind of bringing that back. And so even how you started today's session with, going inward, I thought was a beautiful model of, being in the here and now that, in some ways, might not have been accessible, for before. So, as much as I think that, yes, the burden has shifted and not necessarily lifted, I am really appreciating like what I'm seeing even in the mental health community of, and just in more conversation around mental health issues, and people, I think, being more open with their feelings, even though I know there's still a bit of a struggle, but, there's definitely some shifting, I think, happening there where, through the, these practices that allow us to, sorry, my little flicker there, that really kind of warrant or kind of bring in, a little bit of healing. So sorry. Yeah.
I kind of like this idea of the way that we may be passing down from one generation to the next, like ideas around healing, despite the fact that we are in many ways still in the storm. So what both of you said sort of like brings in a sense of like hopefulness and purposefulness, that even if they don't change, whoever the they is that we are, they know who they are. If they don't change, we have, is what I'm hearing you say, that we are still keeping our stories, not just to ourselves, but passing them on, having discussions, sort of being in that sort of space together. And it certainly made me wonder, we know that there are adverse outcomes for Black women, right? Like 3 times the maternal death than anyone else. And it did make me wonder whether or not just the knowing of these stats, right? Does this impact the mental health of those, not just going through a pregnancy, but also going through the process of raising the products of any pregnancy.
Mhm.
Like I'm thinking about like how back in the day it'd be like we ain't got no McDonald's money, but somehow you think I got grandchild money, right? I'm looking like I don't. Do you have grandchild money? Like you want grandchildren? Come on now, like let's be so for real. Especially like given like the economy and all these other things, all these outside of our sort of control forces.
Mhm.
It makes me wonder about like, well, how then does just knowing these type of statistics, how is that impacting what you're seeing in your individual practices, in your practice, in whatever work and the way that your work shows up? How does it does this show up at all in that? It also off.
Absolutely. There is what I see clinically, what I see in my community, what I see even personally, kind of across my friendships or my family, right? There is a much heightened sense of anxiety, right, around any kind of spectrum of family planning, right? Fears, and again, this depending on what state you're in, what region, right, you are in, right? Your safe access to medical care, right, which is at risk right now and has been at risk for however long, right? The anxiety about pregnancy, right? The anxiety about death, right? The anxiety about all these different kind of forms of loss, right? Related to what we know is happening around us, related to what we know has happened generationally, right? That heightened, right, anxiety is also a sense of loss of safety, right? Loss of access to a particular experience that we have, I think, kind of learned socially, quote unquote, should look a certain way, all these different pressures, right, for that particular experience to look a certain way. And when people are not having that experience, right, the loss that comes from that, the clinical depression, the postpartum depression, like all the things that I see in my practice that are related to these narratives and these fears and these realities. These are not kind of made up stories, right? When we look at statistics, when we see the stories on the news, when we see what's happening in legislation, right? These things are absolutely impacting people's experiences as they are thinking about family, right? Whether they are pregnant or not, right? Whether they've actually experienced essentially kind of physical loss or not, it's affecting the entire experience. And there's grief, I think, all along the way, right? Even if you are now raising children and need to have certain conversations, right, about safety. All of that is a sense of loss and anxiety around, well, this is how we have to keep each other safe. These are the kinds of conversations that we need to have, right, in our community in order to try to protect ourselves in those ways. So I think there has been this generational loss, right, that's always been there that also comes with this heightened anxiety and trying to keep each other safe and quite literally trying to keep each other alive.
Yeah. No, absolutely. That heightened anxiety, that definitely, resonated, and it's what I'm seeing here and, kind of personally and professionally. And, when you add the additional layer of, kind of a long protracted journey to even have a child, finding safety or, I like to frame it as comfort because, once certain bells have been rung, so to speak, it's hard to unring them, and when the worst of the worst has happened. And so, trying to help people kind of, figure out ways to rebuild that sense of that foundation brick by brick is a challenge. But then I also start to see it, coming out with kind of each developmental milestone that they kind of move through. And for some people that I'm working with right now, it's whose kids are about to go to school, can I send my child to school in an environment and feel safe, because not only do I have to worry about the teachers, potentially committing some kind of, aggression or microaggression, but I now have to worry about, school safety because they're doing, gun drills and everything. So there are multiple layers that, I think, again, I feel like that's the theme for this talk is just the multiple layers of what we carry. Carrying and parenting and early, young kids at any age, it's like these often these fears that, that counterparts don't have to worry about, but that are specifically ours. So, yeah. So that hypervigilance for sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And to add into what the both of you have said, at the expense, possibly my stepping outside of my zone, it sort of brings me back to how we all wondered about whether or not Adriana Smith should also be very much part of this conversation, right? Like, and the experiment that they decided to run on her body without permission, without consent,
Yep.
to keep her on life support until a child came into the world who now we like, it's like, and what becomes of the child, right? So
And
that's the example of shifted, not lifted.
exactly.
Right? Yeah.
Exactly. Shifted, not lifted. And, and I even had a reaction when you said keeping her on life support, because she was dead. And, she was an incubator, and there wasn't life. And I know that might be really challenging for some people.
No, I think that is the right word. What you're saying. I said life support for lack of other sort of,
yeah.
Like, I don't know how you describe what they did, but they basically turned her into a human incubator. And it makes me wonder what the goal is, even from there.
Yeah, no, you definitely use the correct, I think, maybe medical terminology. I was just kind of offering a little bit of my maybe personal reaction to that, because I've definitely worked a lot with, the lost community, and, and I feel so sad for not just Adriana not being able to have a sense of dignity in how she transitioned, but the decision being taken away from her family as well. And so now we have the family's experience, but also the experience of this child too, that is coming into the world with some pretty extensive challenges, because, it's one thing when, the mother is on life support later in gestation, but a lot of the images that they have been portraying have been incredibly misleading to think that, she was a lot further along than what she was. She was 8 weeks versus, I think, 6 months or 7 months, which was the picture that they keep showing her with. And so this is, and just even trying to piece together and comprehend what this means medically, because the body kind of decomposes, and, so, and I don't want to get outside of my scope. It's just like what I'm hearing other medical doctors talk about, like how this is creating some unique kind of challenges. And now the family is, supposed to kind of deal with this. And then also let's face it, who's also going to potentially kind of be responsible for this financially. So we have the emotional kind of weight, we have the financial weight, and so now their grieving process, and just kind of imagine how they're, kind of holding up in all of this too. So, yeah. So sorry, I might have gone off with a little bit, but that's just
this is what we're talking about, right? These are the examples of, or this is another really what I find to be more kind of criminal, right, example of Black women's bodies being politicized.
Yes.
Right. And the autonomy, right, being stripped, us being violated, right? This is not, that's why I said, shifted, not lifted. This is not new, right? Where other people get in a room and make a decision about what's going to happen to our bodies, right? And essentially what happens to our bodies then becomes what happens to bodies either physically or psychologically around us, which then becomes, what happens to bodies after us, right? That this is what has been happening for generations, right? This is, now it's medically different, right, than what was happening during enslavement, but it isn't different, right, in terms of the power dynamic. It isn't different in terms of the oppressive systems, right? Someone else being able to make a decision about our bodies. And that is the generational trauma. That's the heightened anxiety around, well, if I can't speak for myself, who's allowed to speak for me? Who has permission to speak for me? And now my family can't speak for me, right? So now what does this all mean, right? I work with a lot of families where if at any point a birther is unable to speak for themselves, and oftentimes I'm working with Black couples and also needing to help navigate the piece around, well, I don't want to also now be seen as an aggressive male, right, and get removed from the hospital while I'm advocating for my partner in here. So I now need to temper myself, right? I can't advocate too hard, because if they're scared of me, then guess what? Birther is left by themselves in here, right? So there's so many nuances around who gets permission to advocate in what way, right? Still being stripped of our voices, right? This should be called, shifted, not lifted, right? This is what that's about for me.
Yes. And it's not like we had the best relationship with the medical system to begin with. And, and so now,
Understatement.
you know what I'm saying? And now, yeah. So to have this on top of all of that.
And I've heard so much rhetoric about this being like a new fear unlocked, right? That this is a new thing to be now concerned about, that it never even occurred to people that this could be a thing. And now that it is, now that it's been placed on the table, it's kind of like, well, where do we even go from here?
Yeah. Listen, I don't know how long we've been saying, listen to Black women. It's on shirts, it's on bags, it's on hoodies. It's a probably like, listen to Black women. We have been saying since 2022, Roe v. Wade, stuff is gonna happen.
Yes.
Stuff is gonna happen. And yeah, y'all mess around, right? But we're the ones who find out.
Yes.
Yes. Right. And we tend to be the ones to find out first.
Yes.
And I think that people forget that all you're doing is kicking the can down the road, because your turn will come.
Yep.
We may go first, but you will be, you're in the line from the second we went and you said nothing.
Absolutely.
From the second we went and you did nothing, you are already in the line. Like people talking about Handmaid's Tale. I'm looking like, you're talking about a story that has already been happening to women of color. It hasn't happened to you.
Yeah.
And now that's the thing that makes it scary. But
I said this dystopian future. I said, you mean the past?
Right. Exactly.
Stuff that's already happened. Where do you think they got this storyline from?
Exactly. Because I'm just thinking about a client that I worked with, a few years ago, who had a, very difficult pregnancy and loss, second trimester, and was not given the choice. And even in California, where we thought, oh, we're protected here, but she ended up at a Catholic hospital and was not allowed to really make a choice that she wanted to make for herself, and had to deliver a baby that was just and therefore creating more trauma for her, when what she wanted to do and what was recommended in other circles was to end the pregnancy for for her health and the baby's health, but because she ended up in a specific place. So it's been here.
It's been here.
Handmaid's
Tale is not creative genius.
Yeah.
No, it's not at all, right? But white people will tell their
stories of what
stories
happened to Black and brown bodies, but to white bodies as the main focus.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, that's most dystopian novels. It's really taking what has already been and what has been allowed for Black and brown bodies to endure, to and applying it now to white situations and seeing, like, are we still scared? And it seems that if it goes in that direction, we're scared. But when it is delayed from them, I'm like, this is going to be a bastardization of the saying, but that's delayed, not denied. Right? Like, I know we usually talk about blessings, but this is still it's a delayed, not denied. You're gonna get it. It's just
right.
It's not going. You didn't get it first.
But it also speaks to this cognitive dissonance, right? Because we will hear, sorry to keep going back to Handmaid's Tale because it really gets me riled up, right? But we hear like, oh, this is our like worst nightmare. And I say, yeah, but you also contributed to this experience of how Black women experience their bodies, right? And their worst nightmare actually happening. You were a large part of that, white women. So like, what does that mean historically to be so disconnected from you creating your worst nightmare in the lives of others? So when we talk about Black motherhood, we can't separate that from how Black motherhood was affected by Black women taking care of white children. That affected Black motherhood, right? But we get to have this cognitive dissonance as though this just happened all the way over there. Very, very, very much so connected.
Very much.
Yeah. I don't think that people are able to often see responsibility and accountability within the larger nomenclature, right? Like we're saying, well, society did, but society is made up of people. And I think it's very easy for us to shirk our individual culpability to the creation of the society that we are living in. I'm like, we didn't get here by osmosis, right? It's purposeful, it's been acted, and it's all the ways in which we deny the humanity of someone else in order to uplift ourselves or to hang on to whatever vestiges of power that we believe that we have been owed, that we've been denied. Having power over somebody else never will get you anything that you're actually seeking. You're really just screwing yourself over just a little bit later down the line. I'm going to switch us into these.
Lori, she said she was gearing up for something.
No, because you all got me thinking. I was trying to figure out how I wanted to articulate this because, Dr. Donna, you mentioned something about how we kind of kicked some things down the road and kind of expecting things to change. And then I think about how, we have been at the forefront of change and trying to change systems. And then I also think about how, we're operating within a larger system and how much of our efforts have been trying to change a system that wasn't designed for us. And are struggling with this kind of theoretically, I think, and so I just wanted to say that, and I'm not sure if other people have thought about that or have a reaction, but I just had this moment. I was like, the system doesn't deserve us.
I don't.
And I know it's like trying to work within the system that we have, and maybe this is a little bit of personal anger that's coming out or what have you, but and seeing how we've been continually devalued, and but yeah, that's kind of what was coming up for me, as
systemic devaluing
yes,
is part of the conversation on how we are able to even consider motherhood and whether or not we get to mother,
right?
Because the system often is sort of getting in the way.
Yes. And ways in which we
have the conversation that
everyone else.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Like Toni Morrison said, that the purpose of racism is to distract, right? Disrupt and distract. And I would say the same thing of patriarchy, right? The purpose is to disrupt and distract. And I have been known to say a time or two that when people are unsure or uncertain of who they are, they must define themselves by what they are not and harm the people that they are not in order for them to find the esteem within themselves, given that they had no identity. So I'm like, well, if there is no, if you do not know yourself, then you cannot actually esteem yourself. And they don't know themselves because away is not a destination, right? Like I want to get away from this, that's not enough, right? And I think that oftentimes males and white folk are defining themselves by what they are not, which is the same thing as saying away as a destination. You wouldn't go to a ticket counter. You can't go to wherever you buy plane tickets. You can't go there and say, I want to go away. You have to say where you want to go, because if I want to go away from Maryland, I could go into DC and it doesn't require a plane ticket. I can just walk, right? So like, I'm thinking about that. I'm just like, they're trying to get away from being Black. They're trying to get away from being women. And so then use their bodies, their lives, their mouths, their beings to actively remove us from our own humanity and screw themselves in the process.
Yeah.
So like, thank you for all that you've added. I know that we only got like time for like a couple of more of my questions, which means I am prompting any of you who are watching now, you got a question, it's burning a hole in your tongue or your fingertips are on fire, put it in the chat now so that we do not miss those questions, because I want to make sure I get your question answered, not just mine. When it comes to like the mother-daughter relationship dynamic, I was wondering, I feel like we are at a time where people are cutting off parents, like, right? Like they're saying, this is no longer safe for me. I'm out, right? And then we have social media, which seems to be like sometimes a facilitator of some relationships and sometimes seems to be the greatest interrupter of some mother-daughter relationships. So based on your own experiences, based on what you've seen, what you've heard, what you know, would you say that there have been structural changes to the mother-daughter relationship? And if so, what are the changes?
Wow.
Yeah, I can't say that there have not been structural changes. I'm trying to think of now how to verbalize the changes, right? That there are structural changes in the mother-daughter relationship as a result of changes in family cohesiveness and family dynamics, and who we're even seeing as family, right? Kind of whether extensions of family or family that feels really kind of disconnected in some ways. So structurally, I do think that the demands of the mother-daughter relationship have changed over time and have had to change over time to kind of meet different needs. Dr. Johnson, jump in, because there's something else I'm thinking that feels like a come back to it.
I was thinking about some of the intergenerational struggles that I've seen, and kind of appreciating historically what some of the older generations have had to go through and how that impacted their ability to be present as mothers, and at the same time having an appreciation for that, and knowing the pain that has caused the younger generations, and so it's created this dance. And when you mentioned social media, and I have a love-hate relationship with it. I love how it's connected so many of us, and also, yes, it's given people, I think, empowered people to appreciate boundaries differently, and to kind of figure out what they can kind of tolerate or not in those relationships. But there's still a lot of longing, and a lot of longing and sadness, that I'm seeing in some of those connections. That I think, when I think about the racism and discrimination that that people have had to endure. And so, yeah, it wasn't really, there wasn't a lot of attention paid to the emotional development of people, because you're trying to survive financially, you're trying to survive, just in so many other ways. And still it kind of creates this loss. So, but I feel like there's more, and I just can't kind of put words to it right now, but that's kind of what comes to mind initially for me.
And as much as I want to talk about men, and I want to decenter men and decenter patriarchy, I do think that oftentimes we are having conversations, or kind of beginning to have more conversations about mother-daughter relationships, and not talking as much about how those are highly influenced and mitigated by relationships with men outside of the family, in the community, right? All these ways in which, depending on what is happening in terms of who is navigating kind of men or maleness, right, in those spaces, oftentimes has a direct impact on a mother-daughter. In terms of emotional resources they have access to, in terms of financial resources they have access to, in terms of educational resources they have access to, right? All these things can really, really, really impact what resources a mother-daughter relationship does have in these ways. So I find it hard to sometimes have that conversation without having a conversation about what's also going on in the rest of the family dynamic, and what's going on generationally, and kind of what are the messages that mothers and daughters learned about mothers, about daughters, about women, about relationships, right? All those things are oftentimes, there's a line, and kind of there's a thread of where men have come in, or kind of where men have been in, and oftentimes influence, sometimes negatively, sometimes positive. I think mostly negatively in some ways, right? But having that conversation, right, about particular mother-daughter dynamics without talking about what's going on around them, and male gaze and male attention and male power, also seems like it can miss some things about what's really impacting mother-daughter relationships, right? And where the focus is, and where the love comes from. Because if we are so under-resourced, right, because of so many other oppressive dynamics, right, what are we expecting a mother-daughter relationship to be able to hold? And where's that coming from? More of those relationships than we're actually really offering.
Yeah. I know you better come on. You said, let's put that thing back in context. There's a lot of context.
We can't, right? So
yes, so it's like the constant strain of all of these factors, whether or not there are missing parents, whether they're how outside is even allowing people to be there. I was thinking about resources, even outside of monetary. I'm thinking about time as a resource. What does time look like? We do not all have the same 24 hours. I have had to say that to a few people. I'm looking like, you don't have Beyonce's 24 hours. Because when you can buy other people's time, right? And now you've purchased into having even more than 24 hours within your day. So thank you for reminding us to put the context back in. Put it on there.
Black mothers are expected to do a lot and carry a lot when they are significantly under-resourced.
Exactly. Exactly.
And I think that has become, in many ways, par for the course. We do have a question from the chat.
We do.
And so Tasha asked, as we think about liberation, what does that look like for all of you?
An island somewhere. No. I mean, yes, but yeah.
Really good question. What starts to come to mind is just a little bit of a lightness that I haven't experienced yet. You know, I find myself feeling freer than I did in my 20s and my 30s and my 40s, or, you know, just, I think just coming from life experience. But I think there is, you know, there's a different kind of freedom, you know, maybe politically and socially, and, you know, that I think would kind of be part of that. You know, I think, yes, there's a little bit more freedom of time and, you know, freedom of, you know, just around being connected to who I am and not necessarily caring what other people think. And, you know, that feels like liberation. And at the same time, you know, the access that I have to certain resources or privileges that I have feel, you know, still somewhat muted, knowing that, you know, that those rights aren't afforded to everybody equally. So that still keeps me in the, you know, in the trenches.
Yeah, when I think about liberation, I don't know if it's individually, collectively, communally, there's the first words that were coming to mind was like autonomy, right? Freedom of choice, and that's around movement, that's around dress, that's around, you know, who we're around, it's around what we're around, it's around, you know, liberation in what ground we are able to stand on that feels safe, how connected we feel to our own bodies and kind of the bodies of others. But I even thinking about, you know, what Dr. Johnson says, like, it's hard for me to kind of picture it because we ain't there. So it's like we can have all these different kind of versions and visions of that, but they're still so far, right? And so I think a lot of people would have very different answers to what liberation would feel like for them, or what they could envision based on their, you know, specific experiences of oppression, right? It might speak more to like sexual liberation. It looks like this, and this kind of like bodily autonomy in these ways, and being able to access pleasure, right? Being able to do all these things, right? And right, that's also a part of what I'm thinking in terms of autonomy over self. And you'd use the word at the top of the hour, that sovereignty, right? Like that being core, right, to liberation, right? But I don't know what other people's answers would be around liberation, right? But those are things that kind of come to mind. A lot about choice, a lot about voice, a lot about autonomy, and a lot about connection, and us being able to decide like the who, the what, the where, the how happening to us in a safe way.
Thank you both for bringing that into the space, for answering that question. Tasha, I'm gonna throw it back to you and say it in this way, because I'm gonna give you my little answer too. I think there's a difference between freedom and liberation, and we talk about them as though they are the same. They are not. They're not equal. Just like your fingers are not equal. Freedom and liberation are definitely not the same. I believe that freedom is something someone can grant you. Liberation is something you have to grant yourself. And that with that granting of self and liberation, I would say take it back to the Nat Ministry. Oh gosh, Trisha Hershey, right? And to some of the work that she has been asking us to do. She's been asking us to sit down and dream. Yes, rest is resistance. That jump right there, it changed my life. So spending some time with yourself and your body, thinking and dreaming about what it could look like if, right? And asking a future version of yourself, maybe a future version in a completely different, in a parallel universe, how they would have done it, how they would have achieved it, so that now you have steps to your own liberation. Now, I do need us to go ahead and we're going to take a breath together, because I feel like this was a heavy, but still such a good, delicious conversation. I want to say thank y'all for that. But I do want us to recenter real quick. So just take a breath together. In, 1, 2, 3, out. 1, 2, 3. Y'all did that. I feel like this conversation, it gave so much. And I want to give all of the resources, including the resource of you. Like, where can the people follow you? Where can they see your work? And what do you have coming up as an offering that people may be able to partake in?
Go ahead, Dr. Johnson.
Okay. How we begin, so we end.
You can find me on Instagram at Dr. Lori Johnson, LOREEJOHNSON. And I just like to put a little plug in for next week around it's the inaugural National Black Infertility and Reproductive Health Week. And so that's a really meaningful milestone in the reproductive space that was spearheaded by Fertility for Colored Girls founder, Reverend Stacy. So I'm excited about that and participating in that. So stay tuned.
All right.
Thank you for sharing. Again, my name is Dr. Ayanna Abrams. I run my mouth the most on Instagram. You can find me there at Dr._Ayanna_A. That's DR_AYANNA_A. I have a solo mental health practice here in Atlanta called Ascension Behavioral Health, where I see individuals, couples, and I do a lot of kind of corporate mental health and kind of engagements like this. But you can find me the most on Instagram and find anything else that's coming up for me.
Love it. And you can find me on Instagram at Dr. Donna Oriowo, DonnaOriowo. Some other lovely resources that we have for you all include, there's a Postpartum Support International that has a Black Mom support group. So look into them. Black Mamas Matter Alliance. Sisters in Loss. This is particularly for those who have lost, who have had or experienced loss. The broken brown egg. And there is, of course, our hosts. Follow them. So the Zora Neale Hurston Trust and the oh my goodness, Black Girl Health Collective.
Black Girl Health Collective.
Yes.
Goodness, my tongue today and my mouth, like my mouth and my mind are not connected.
It's all good.
Forgive me. And as for me and whatever I have coming up, I'm on a book tour currently for my book, Drink Water, Mind Your Business. So feel free to grab you a copy, as well as tell me how it feels to be reading that copy. I hope that all of you have a delicious day, that you take care of yourself, go drink some water, go mind your business, go sit down somewhere. I think that the work day should be about done in about like 23 minutes. Let's call it a day at 3 or a little after. All right, y'all. I hope that you have a great day. Thank you for joining in on this conversation, and hope to hear from you all soon. Bye.
Thank you for this wonderful conversation.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for holding that space for us.